My name's Summer, I'm 32, and I'll never forget the day my wealthy husband humiliated me in court. His attorney started flashing papers, insisting that my supposed infertility broke the terms of our prenup. In front of everyone, he called me sterile. In front of everyone, he called me barren, accusing me of trapping him in a marriage without children. This is my story, and hope you will listen till the end and show some support. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Summer, our whole community with you.
For those who are watching, do not forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more true stories.
Let's go back 3 years to the moment my life collided with a master manipulator. Picture it. I was an event coordinator at a boutique Manhattan hotel when Christian Morrison appeared, as if he'd stepped straight out of a glossy romance cover. 6'2", silver at the temples, ice blue eyes, and a grin that probably came with a dental plan worth my annual salary. He was there to plan his company's annual gala, and I was the lucky one assigned to grant his every request. It has to be flawless, he told me, leaning forward with those piercing eyes. Money was no limitation. The first of many famous last lines. I was completely enchanted. Within a week, bouquets flooded my tiny studio apartment. He whisked me off to restaurants where the waiters greeted him like royalty, and the wine cost more than my rent. When he proposed on his penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park, slipping a diamond on my finger that could bankroll a small country, I thought I'd won it all. Our wedding looked like a magazine spread. Couture gown, celebrity planner, guests pulled from Forbes. His mother, Elena, arrived from California, shimmering in enough diamonds to light up Tiffany's, and his partner, Marcus, toasted him as the picture of loyalty and triumph. I truly believed I was Cinderella at last. But fairy tales never mention what happens when midnight hits, and the prince's mask starts to slip, and calling him a frog would be unfair to frogs. The first warning sign came on our honeymoon in Tuscany. The villa overlooked endless vineyards, and I was glowing with newlywed joy. Over breakfast on our terrace, I said softly, "Christian, I've been thinking, maybe we should try for a baby when we're home." His espresso froze midair, his smile turning brittle, as if I'd just suggested something unthinkable. "That's wonderful, darling," he said at last. "But let's not rush into that," he said smoothly. "We should just enjoy being newlyweds first." Sounded sensible enough, right? Except his version of enjoying marriage meant him working 16-hour days while I played hostess, curating our penthouse and arranging dinners for his business contacts. Every time I mentioned having children, he produced a brand new reason to delay, like he had them preloaded. The company was growing, the market unstable. We should travel first. Paris, Tokyo, or whatever destination could serve as distraction of the week. And to be fair, those getaways were flawless. During those trips, he reverted to the man I fell for. He held my hand through the Louvre, kissed me on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, and filled Instagram with perfectly filtered declarations about his beautiful wife. His followers adored it. Endless comments about #couple goals and when we'd start a family. If only they could have seen what happened off camera, where I was treated less like a partner and more like high-end decor. Admired, but untouched. The moment we got home, the illusion shattered. Christian vanished into his office, or spent hours at the gym, and our bedroom turned into something closer to a museum, beautiful, silent, and closed off. Whenever I tried to get close, he'd suddenly remember an urgent email, because apparently global markets collapse if he takes 5 minutes to care about his wife. I became an expert at rationalizing his absence. Successful men are busy, I told myself. Empires take time, but lying awake night after night while he faced the other direction, I knew deep down that nothing about this felt right, not even a little. My best friend Rachel, a nurse, and the only person brave enough to confront me, saw it immediately. "Summer, you look drained," she said at brunch, studying me like a patient chart. "When's the last time you two actually talked?" "We talk all the time," I said automatically, and even I could hear the emptiness in my voice. "Sure, we exchanged words, but conversation? Not really." "About what? His business? Your party plans? When did he last ask how you feel?" I opened my mouth but found nothing to say. Because she was right, I couldn't remember. Christian had perfected the kind of talk that sounds caring, but says absolutely nothing. Like a seasoned politician, only with better suits and darker motives. He'd ask about my day while scrolling through his phone, offer compliments for social media, and treat me like wallpaper once the cameras were off. The final crack came on our second anniversary. I had planned everything. His favorite restaurant, the same vintage wine we'd shared on our wedding night. I'd splurged on lingerie that probably cost more than some people's monthly mortgage payments, hoping to feel close to my husband again, to remember what had once made us fall in love. Christian walked in 3 hours late, loosening his tie with that detached ease. "Sorry, darling," he said, not even glancing my way. Marcus and I were going over quarterly projections. You know how time disappears when you're talking expansion strategies. I stood there in our living room, my dress fitting like it had been sculpted for me, makeup flawless, hope quietly suffocating in my chest. "Christian," I said softly, "it's our anniversary." For a moment he froze, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights, before slipping into that smooth, rehearsed smile. "Of course it is. How careless of me. Let me shower, and we'll grab takeout from that Thai place you love." Takeout on our anniversary, while I stood there dressed for seduction, realizing I'd become the most elegant fool in the city. That was the night something inside me shifted. While he showered, claiming he needed to rinse off the day's stress, as though expensive soap could scrub away emotional distance, I picked up his phone. I knew it was wrong, but desperation has its own logic. I was drowning, and I needed air. His messages looked painfully ordinary. Work threads with Marcus, logistics with his assistant. Nothing salacious, nothing secret, no affair to uncover, only a digital life as sterile as our marriage. Still, something about his exchanges with Marcus felt off, too relaxed, too warm. They had an ease that no longer existed between us. Private jokes, shorthand, a rhythm that suggested true closeness. It was like reading the texts of two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, a concept that felt extinct in my world. You've heard the saying about curiosity and cats, but this cat was about to dig up something remarkable, and I had every intention of living to tell it. Marcus had always been part of the picture. Christian's best friend from Harvard, roommate turned business partner, the man who knew my husband's every move better than I did. They'd founded their firm straight out of college, and somehow, Marcus had never stopped orbiting our lives, always in attendance, always invited, always there. Marcus was part of every holiday, always there at our table, never seeming out of place. If anything, I was the extra wheel in their perfectly balanced duo. Once I started paying attention, I noticed things I'd brushed off while busy pretending our life was picture perfect. The way Christian lit up whenever Marcus entered a room, the sudden spark in his voice, the genuine laughter that had long vanished when he was alone with me. Their shoulders brushed too often during business talks, their connection seamless, their rhythm natural. I felt like an intruder in my own home. One November evening, Christian casually announced, "Marcus will be joining us for Thanksgiving," as if scheduling a staff meeting. "Of course he will," I said, my tone dripping with irony. Would it even count as a holiday without him? Should I set an extra place for our next anniversary too, if we still celebrated those? His eyes narrowed. "He's family, Summer. You know he has nowhere else to go." Family. An interesting word for a man with living parents in Connecticut and a sister in Boston. Yet somehow, our home had become his holiday destination every single year. I felt like a guest in my own house, a paying guest at that. Still, rather than start another argument destined to end in silence, I chose observation. Christmas became my field study. I watched them closely. The stolen looks, the unspoken jokes, the kind of quiet understanding that only comes with deep affection. Marcus could make Christian laugh with a simple glance. And when Marcus praised the meal I'd spent hours cooking, Christian smiled like he had done all the work. Ever witnessed two people clearly in love pretending to be just friends? It's like watching a play where everyone forgot the script but insists on finishing the performance anyway. Then, after the holidays, came the discovery that cracked everything open. Christian forgot to lock the safe in his home office. A first for a man who treated security like a religion. Inside were the usual things: deeds, portfolios, insurance papers, and something that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I hesitated, knowing full well I was crossing about 17 different moral boundaries. But at that point, our marriage was already rubble, and I needed to know what had really been living under my roof. Most of what I found looked standard: contracts, legal files, investments, until I reached the documents that changed everything. Hidden between property deeds and his life insurance papers, like some cruel holiday surprise, was a plain manila envelope stamped with the logo of a medical clinic. The header read, Metropolitan Men's Health Center, dated 3 years before Christian and I had even crossed paths, long before the flowers, the penthouse proposal, the endless speeches about wanting a family, and the sympathetic nods every time I mentioned trying for a baby. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the papers. They had good reason to. Vasectomy consultation and procedure confirmation. Voluntary sterilization. Procedure successful. Patient informed of permanent outcome. Take a moment to process that. The man who'd convinced me I was the problem had deliberately ensured we'd never have children, years before I entered the picture. The boldness of it almost deserved applause. The envelope slipped from my hands like a live wire. For a while, I could only stand there in his office, staring at the papers fanned out across his polished mahogany desk. 3 years before we met, he'd already made sure fatherhood was off the table. 3 years before the fairy tale courtship. 3 years before he let me believe my body had betrayed us. Every tender conversation about our future family was a carefully rehearsed scene. Every smile when I mentioned baby names, every nod at the sight of a stroller, all theater, and he deserved a standing ovation for the performance. He hadn't just lied, he'd constructed an entire reality around his deception. I pulled out my phone, snapping photos with shaking hands, anger and cold clarity flooding my veins. Then I returned everything precisely where I'd found it, not a millimeter out of place. Because if Christian thought he'd cornered the market on strategy, he was about to learn just how long I could play the game. The weeks that followed were agony, every moment spent pretending not to know, every touch and conversation a test of my restraint. I sat across from Christian at the dinner table, my face calm, my voice steady, while inside I was screaming so loud it could have shattered glass. He laughed easily with Marcus, their heads bent close, trading updates about new investments, and suddenly everything between them looked different. The question hit me like a punch. Did Marcus know? Had he been in on it the whole time? The answer came before I could even finish the thought. Of course he had. You don't share a dorm, build a company, and sustain a lifelong friendship without knowing details as personal as that, especially when those details shape the marriage your partner was pretending to nurture. You've been a little distant lately, Christian remarked one night, eyes glued to his tablet, thumb lazily flicking through emails as if reading them made him look like a devoted husband. Just tired, I said smoothly, my smile practiced. He didn't have a clue that I'd seen through his performance, that every word out of his mouth was a line from a script he'd written years ago. Then again, blindness was one of Christian's greatest talents. He only noticed what suited him. A convenient skill when your whole life depended on pretending. The last missing piece clicked into place a few nights later, during a dinner party we threw for his colleagues. That evening, the illusion finally cracked wide open. I was doing what I always did, smiling, serving, keeping conversation flowing, the picture of the devoted hostess. Then I caught sight of something that froze me in place. Marcus leaned in to fix Christian's tie, his fingers lingering just a second too long. Their eyes locked, and in that small, silent exchange, the truth unfolded with brutal clarity. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't business. It was love. Real, tender, unmistakable love. I slipped into the kitchen, gripping the cool marble counter so tightly my hands went pale. My thoughts spun. How long had this been going on? Since their college days? Had it grown quietly while they built their empire together? And the question that burned deepest, if he loved Marcus, why marry me at all? The answer had already been sitting in that manila envelope. The vasectomy, the prenuptial agreement I'd signed without blinking, dazzled by wealth and charm, the marriage built around a woman desperate for a family, doomed to fail by design. It was all so perfectly orchestrated. Christian hadn't married me out of love. He'd chosen me as camouflage, the polished wife to showcase in photos and galas, while his real life unfolded in private with Marcus. And when our barren marriage collapsed, the narrative would be airtight. The heartbroken husband, betrayed by biology, keeping his empire safe behind legal walls I'd unknowingly helped build. It was in its way a masterpiece of manipulation, chilling, heartless, and disturbingly clever. I almost had to respect the precision of the scheme, if it hadn't been crafted to destroy me. Almost. That word sat heavy in my chest as I began digging for the truth. Not guessing, not imagining, but investigating like my survival depended on it, because in many ways it did. I stopped playing the amateur sleuth and called in a professional. Her name was Detective Sarah Chen, a seasoned private investigator known for unearthing the darkest corners of marital betrayal. Her reputation alone said she'd seen every version of infidelity the city had to offer. I paid her quietly, using money from an account Christian didn't know existed, a modest inheritance from my grandmother that I'd wisely kept separate. Maybe I'd had better instincts than I realized. When we met for the first time, it was at a quiet cafe in Queens, far enough from Manhattan that neither Christian nor Marcus would ever appear by chance. Sarah was in her 40s, sharp as glass, her expression calm but unyielding. She had that steady, seen-it-all composure I wished I'd developed years earlier. "I need to know if my husband is cheating," I told her, keeping my voice low, my hands wrapped tightly around a cooling cup of coffee. She studied me over the rim of her mug, eyes assessing. "Most women come to me after their gut tells them something's wrong," she said. "What's yours saying?" "That my entire marriage has been a performance," I answered. "And I'm done being the audience." Sarah gave a slow nod, the kind that comes from experience rather than sympathy. It was both comforting and crushing, because it confirmed what I already feared. My story wasn't new, but this time I was determined it wouldn't end the same way. "Give me 3 weeks," Sarah said. "If there's something there, I'll uncover it." Those 21 days stretched longer than any I'd ever lived. Every morning, I woke beside Christian, smiling, serving breakfast, keeping up the facade of the perfect wife, while secretly assembling the evidence that would free me. The fact that he noticed nothing different spoke volumes, proof of how little attention he'd ever paid to the real woman beside him, as opposed to the flawless image he'd invented for show. One evening, I overheard Marcus's voice drift from the living room. "Summer seems a little off lately, doesn't she?" he asked, clearly unaware I was standing just beyond the doorway. And my dear husband, the man who had publicly sworn to cherish me, chuckled and said, "She's probably just hormonal. You know how women get hormonal." That was his diagnosis after 3 years of marriage. Not concerned, not curious, just dismissive, as if my feelings were a passing thunderstorm he could wait out. I wanted to walk in and prove exactly how hormonal I could be, but I held my tongue. Patience, I reminded myself, was about to become my sharpest weapon. Then, on a Tuesday morning, while Christian was supposedly at the gym with Marcus, their sacred daily routine that suddenly looked like the perfect smokescreen, Sarah called. "We need to talk," she said. "I've got what you wanted." When we met, she slid a folder across the table. The photos inside were devastating, and yet, in a twisted way, confirming. Christian and Marcus leaving a midtown hotel together. Not exactly the venue for board meetings, unless your agenda included silk sheets. Another photo showed them at a small restaurant downtown, their hands intertwined across the table, faces soft and unguarded. The truth was right there in glossy color prints. Christian Morrison, my husband, and Marcus, his supposed business partner, looking every bit the couple they'd pretended not to be. One of the photos showed them kissing, not a friendly peck, but a long, familiar kiss, in the doorway of Marcus's apartment building just past midnight, the same night Christian had sworn he was stuck at the office finishing reports. "How long?" I asked quietly, my eyes fixed on the glossy evidence scattered across the table like the world's cruelest deck of cards. Sarah didn't hesitate. "From what I can gather, since college. Maybe longer." They're cautious but predictable. Hotel bookings under Marcus's name. Dinner reservations for 2. Always at places far from anyone they might know. Your husband's been leading this double life for a very long time. Oddly enough, I didn't feel the explosion of rage I expected. just an eerie calm settling over me like a weighted blanket. The picture was complete now. No more guessing, no more spinning excuses for what had always been obvious. Christian hadn't just betrayed me. He'd constructed an entire marriage to protect his secret. The vasectomy, the sympathetic nods about starting a family, the carefully worded prenup. It was all part of the architecture of deceit. He'd built the perfect illusion, designed to leave me childless, humiliated, and empty-handed when it all came crashing down. But what he hadn't accounted for, his one fatal flaw, was that I would discover everything before the curtain fell, and I had no intention of letting his masterpiece of manipulation end the way he'd planned. He'd made the mistake of underestimating me. "I want a divorce," I said one Thursday evening, standing in the doorway of his office while he pored over quarterly numbers. I'd rehearsed those words in my head for weeks, but when they finally came out, they were steadier, stronger than I'd imagined. Christian didn't even glance up from his laptop. Why would he? I was just his prop, not a person. "Don't be dramatic, Summer," he said flatly. "Whatever's upsetting you, we can talk about it calmly, like adults." "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied. "I'm done. I want out." That made him pause. He finally looked up, and behind that composed expression, I saw the flicker of calculation, the same expression he probably wore during boardroom standoffs. His voice softened, rehearsed, persuasive. "Let's not rush into anything. Marriage takes work. We both need to." Effort? The laugh that escaped me was sharp and bitter. "When's the last time you even touched me, Christian? Or talked to me about something real? When's the last time I was your wife and not just a designer accessory for company photos?" He rose slowly, circling his desk with that smooth confidence that used to make my heart race. Now it only made my skin crawl. "You're being emotional," he said, his tone clipped. "And this kind of reaction makes productive communication impossible." "I'm done communicating," I said evenly. "The papers are filed. You'll be served in the morning." That was when the mask slipped. For just an instant, the polished charm vanished, and I saw what had been there all along, the cold strategist who'd built this illusion from the ground up. "You might want to rethink that," he said quietly. "Remember the prenup, Summer? You signed away quite a bit when you were so eager to become Mrs. Morrison." There it was. The warning I'd known was coming. His reminder that he'd rigged the game in advance, that he designed our marriage to leave me destitute the moment I dared to walk away. "I remember," I said, matching his calm. "I also remember the clause about fault-based divorce, the one that includes spousal support in cases of adultery or fraud." For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty crossed his face, a hairline fracture in his marble composure. "I don't know what you think you know," he began, his voice colder now. "But I know about Marcus," I said. The air between us went still. The words hung there, electric, dangerous, impossible to take back. Christian's expression went blank, that practiced mask he wore whenever he was calculating his next move. Only this time he wasn't negotiating a merger. He was realizing the empire he'd built on lies was about to collapse. "I don't know what you're talking about," Christian said, his tone flat and measured. "Of course you don't," I replied, turning toward the door. Then I paused, letting the silence hang before delivering the line I'd been saving. "Oh, and Christian, you might want to give your lawyer a call. You're going to need the best team money can buy." The divorce battle unfolded exactly as I knew it would. Ruthless, expensive, and drenched in arrogance. Christian assembled a squad of high-powered attorneys in immaculate suits. Men who built their careers protecting millionaires from the wives they'd outgrown. They came at me hard, filing endless motions, questioning my sanity, my worth, my role in the marriage. But their biggest error was assuming I was still the gullible woman who'd signed that prenup 3 years earlier without a second thought. The preliminary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. I arrived early, wearing a tailored navy suit. Professional, composed, impossible to dismiss. Christian's team had requested a closed proceeding, but somehow word had leaked. The press loves stories like ours: wealth, betrayal, scandal, and Morrison Investment Group was too prominent to escape attention. Christian walked in flanked by his lawyers, and, of course, Marcus, loyal companion, business partner, and emotional support in one. They sat together, whispering strategy, casting smug glances across the courtroom like generals about to win a war they'd already declared over. At my table sat Jennifer Walsh, my attorney, sharp, confident, and known for turning impossible cases into courtroom upsets. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Ready?" I touched my purse, feeling the manila envelope tucked safely inside. I've been ready for months. When the session began, Christian's lead lawyer rose with the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to dominating rooms. His voice was solemn, theatrical. My client, Mr. Morrison, entered this marriage with the sincere belief that he and Mrs. Morrison would start a family together. Unfortunately, it soon became clear that Mrs. Morrison was unable to fulfill this essential part of their agreement, causing irreparable damage to the relationship. Unable to fulfill. The phrase echoed through the room like a judgment. It was meant to slice me open, to frame me as defective, as less than. I could feel the unspoken pity from every corner of the courtroom, the quiet whispers of strangers, wondering what was wrong with me. It was almost convincing. Almost. Then came the misstep that sealed their fate. The attorney turned toward me, wearing a self-satisfied grin that practically dripped with condescension. "Furthermore, Your Honor," he declared, "medical records will show that Mrs. Morrison is, in fact, infertile." And right there, he handed me the moment I'd been waiting for. "My client has endured 3 years of deception," Christian's attorney continued smoothly, "during which his wife concealed her medical condition, rendering conception impossible." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard the air leave the room. Judge Harrison's gaze moved to Christian, waiting for some kind of clarification that didn't come. Christian's color drained in stages, confidence to shock to something close to nausea, a rapid unraveling for a man who prided himself on control. "Your Honor," I said, rising before Jennifer could stop me, my voice steady, almost calm. "I have evidence I'd like to submit to the court." My heels clicked against the marble like a countdown as I crossed the courtroom, and I handed that familiar manila envelope, the one that had changed everything, to the judge. The only sound was the soft crinkle of paper as he opened it and began to review the contents. The vasectomy records, the investigators' photos, the credit card statements showing hotel stays and intimate dinners charged under Christian's name. The phone logs documenting nightly calls to Marcus during those so-called late work sessions. Judge Harrison's expression darkened with every page he turned. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes moving from Christian to Marcus, then to me, like he was tracking a volley no one wanted to return. "Mr. Morrison," he said, voice heavy with authority and disgust, "would you care to explain these documents?" Christian's lawyer bolted to his feet, flustered. "Your Honor, we weren't made aware of these materials. We request a continuance so we can properly examine the allegations." "Allegations?" the judge repeated, his eyebrows arching sharply. He held up one of the photos, the one of Christian and Marcus locked in a kiss outside the apartment building. "Are you implying this is fabricated? Because it appears rather self-explanatory." I watched it happen, the implosion of Christian's carefully constructed world, and though I suppose I should have felt some guilt, I didn't. After years of being told I was the defective one, the unworthy one, watching him cornered by the truth felt like poetic justice. Marcus sat rigid, his skin the color of paper, his eyes fixed on his hands as though the answer to salvation might be written there. The man who'd spent years playing the supportive business partner now couldn't even look up. Jennifer rose beside me, her tone crisp and confident. "Your Honor, these documents demonstrate that Mr. Morrison maintained a secret relationship with Mr. Delacroix throughout his marriage. The vasectomy records confirm he never intended to have children, making his claims about my client's supposed infertility not only false, but intentionally deceitful." The judge flipped through the photos again, his disgust deepening. This court has seen its share of dishonesty, but the level of calculation here is extraordinary. Mr. Morrison appears to have entered into marriage as a smokescreen for his ongoing relationship with— he glanced at his notes— Mr. Marcus Delacroix. Furthermore, he structured the prenuptial agreement to ensure Mrs. Morrison would be left with nothing once the marriage inevitably collapsed due to his own sterilization. Christian finally managed to speak, though his voice cracked under the weight of the room. "Your Honor, my relationship with Marcus is strictly professional. It was a weak denial, and the look on the judge's face made it clear. No one in that courtroom believed a word of it. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Harrison said, his tone glacial and final, "I strongly advise you not to commit perjury in my courtroom. The evidence says otherwise, and I've been on this bench long enough to recognize a lie when I hear one." The journalists in the gallery were a flurry of motion, pens scratching furiously. I could already picture tomorrow's headlines splashed across every financial paper in New York. "Investment mogul's secret life exposed. Marriage built on deception. Christian's immaculate public image was disintegrating right before my eyes, collapsing faster than a sandcastle in a storm surge, and I had the best seat in the house. In light of this evidence," the judge continued, "I am declaring the prenuptial agreement null and void on the grounds of fraud. Mrs. Morrison entered into the marriage under false pretenses, believing her husband shared her wish for a family when, in truth, he had taken steps to make that impossible." Christian's lead attorney looked stunned, as though someone had just slapped him across the face with a briefcase. "Your Honor, we respectfully request—" The judge's voice cut through the room like sharpened steel. "I'm awarding Mrs. Morrison 50% of all marital assets, including the primary residence, secondary vacation properties, and a significant portion of Morrison Investment Group. 50%. Half of everything. The penthouse where I'd lived like a ghost, the Hamptons estate that had hosted his glittering soirees, and the crowning jewel, a controlling share of the company Christian and Marcus had built together, the empire they'd guarded so fiercely." Christian shot up from his chair as if jolted by electricity. "Your Honor, that's absurd. The company is my life's work, which," Judge Harrison interrupted coolly, "was developed during your marriage. Under community property law, your wife was entitled to honesty about your intentions and fertility. Instead, you engaged in calculated deceit, a level of fraud that this court finds reprehensible." I could almost see the realization hit him. The numbers, the power, the empire slipping through his fingers. The man who'd once prided himself on outsmarting everyone had finally been outmaneuvered by the woman he thought was ornamental. It was, in its way, poetic justice. Precise, devastating, and richly deserved. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Within 48 hours, word of Christian's secret life and courtroom humiliation had ignited Manhattan's financial world. It was the scandal of the season. Betrayal, deception, and ruin rolled into one irresistible headline. His colleagues began vanishing like smoke. Business partners backed away. The same investors who'd once worshipped him now refused his calls. Luncheon invitations disappeared, and boardroom doors quietly shut. Christian Morrison, once the golden boy of finance, had become untouchable. Marcus didn't escape the wreckage either. He took the brunt of the professional backlash, shunned by clients, and whispered about in every conference room. The partnership that had seemed unbreakable just days before was unraveling in full public view, and neither of them could do a thing to stop it. Their investors, already jittery from the headlines, began pulling their capital the moment they realized the firm's two founders had been living a melodrama that made daytime television seem tame. In a matter of days, Morrison Investment Group became radioactive, and Marcus, once the golden partner, turned into collateral damage. Meanwhile, I moved back into the penthouse. Christian shuffled through the rooms packing boxes, his empire reduced to cardboard and silence. Watching him gather his designer suits and framed awards felt like witnessing a fallen general retreat from a battlefield he'd once commanded. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman he'd tried to discard with nothing now lived surrounded by the spoils of his vanity, the sleek furniture, the art he'd bought to impress people who no longer took his calls. "This isn't over, Summer," he said on his last day, standing amid the wreckage of his past life. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you're doing. That company will eat you alive. You'll lose everything within a year." I sat in his favorite leather chair, the one where he'd buried himself in spreadsheets while pretending I didn't exist, and smiled. "You know what's funny, Christian? You spent 3 years convincing yourself I was helpless, that I was too blind, too soft to ever fight back. And yet, here we are." After he left, the penthouse felt transformed. The air itself was lighter, as if the walls had exhaled for the first time in years. I walked through each room, reclaiming them one by one. No longer a curated museum of his ego, but a home I could finally live in. The art collection was the first to go. Every ostentatious piece he'd purchased to signal sophistication was boxed up and donated to the Met. Let them deal with his legacy. I was busy creating my own. Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer turned trusted advisor, guided me through assuming control of Morrison Investment Group. The firm was bleeding cash and clients like a ship taking on water, but underneath the wreckage lay a structure worth saving. For all their deceit, Christian and Marcus had built something solid. They'd just destroyed their own credibility. "You have two paths," Jennifer told me one afternoon as we spread financial reports across my kitchen island. "Sell your shares now and walk away rich enough to buy an island or rebuild. The second option's harder, but if you can repair the company's name, the payoff could be enormous." I didn't need to think long. "I didn't go through all this to cash out," I said. "I want to prove it can thrive without them." That conviction carried me into my first board meeting as a major shareholder. The room was packed with men who'd once viewed me as ornamental, the quiet wife who smiled for photos and stayed out of the way. Now, they had to treat me as their equal. The discomfort was almost visible. "Mrs. Morrison," one of the directors began cautiously, as if diffusing a live explosive, "we're pleased to have you here." For the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. Not beside a man who underestimated me, but in control of my own future. "We appreciate your enthusiasm," one of the board members said, his tone careful, patronizing in that polished corporate way. "But running an investment firm requires very specialized knowledge and experience." "You're absolutely right," I replied, with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "That's why I'm bringing in expert consultants and advisors for the transition. But let's be clear. I'm not stepping aside. This is my company now. Rebuilding Morrison Investment Group, soon to be something new entirely, felt like performing emergency surgery on a patient bleeding out on the table. Every day presented a fresh crisis. Clients threatening to withdraw their accounts, employees whispering about job security, and competitors circling like vultures, eager to pick at the carcass. But I had advantages Christian never did. He'd mastered spreadsheets and stock projections. I'd mastered people. Years spent organizing events and navigating egos had trained me to read subtext, gauge motives, and understand what people really wanted. Not just what they said aloud. Those instincts turned out to be priceless in business. My first move was symbolic but vital. Rebranding. Morrison Investment Group ceased to exist. From its ashes emerged Meridian Capital Partners, a clean name for a clean slate, one untainted by scandal or deceit. I hired a top-tier crisis management team, a sharp new marketing agency, and, most importantly, I recruited a CEO who could rebuild trust where Christian had destroyed it, Rebecca Torres. Rebecca was everything I wasn't supposed to be. A seasoned finance executive with 15 years of experience salvaging failing firms, she'd earned her place in a field dominated by men who routinely underestimated her. When we met, she looked at me across the conference table, arms crossed, assessing. "Why me?" she asked. "You could easily hire someone cheaper, someone less likely to challenge you." "Because you know what it feels like to walk into a room full of men who assume you don't belong," I said simply. "And because when I studied your history, I realized you're exactly the kind of leader Christian would never have chosen, which makes you perfect for what we're building." Rebecca's expression softened into a slow, knowing smile. "Then let's build something that outlasts both of them," she said. And just like that, Meridian Capital Partners was born, not from ambition or greed, but from the ashes of betrayal, rebuilt by women who'd been underestimated one too many times. "You want to prove the company can survive without him," Rebecca had said once. "No," I'd corrected. "I want to prove it can thrive better without him." The first 6 months tested every ounce of that conviction. We lost nearly 40% of our clients, had to cut a third of the staff, and faced enough financial turbulence to make even seasoned analysts sweat. There were nights when I stared at balance sheets and quietly wondered if Christian had been right, if I'd overestimated myself, if I was in over my head. But slowly, the tide shifted. New clients began coming in, curious, bold investors drawn to our story. The redemption arc was irresistible. A company reborn from scandal, rebuilt on honesty and accountability. We leaned into it, branding ourselves around transparency and ethics, led by women who knew firsthand the cost of deceit. It wasn't just marketing, it was truth, and people responded. Meridian Capital Partners began to rise. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus called. Somehow, he got through the front desk and reached me during one of those late nights when the office was empty, except for the hum of city lights and the weight of quarterly reports. "Summer," he began, his voice thick with regret. "I wanted to apologize. I never meant for you to get hurt in any of this." I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair, exhaustion and clarity washing over me in equal measure. "But you knew I would be," I said evenly. "You knew Christian married me under false pretenses. You knew about the vasectomy. You knew he planned to make me the scapegoat when it all fell apart. And you went along with it anyway." There was a long silence on the line, the kind that stretches heavy with unspoken guilt. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. "I love him," Marcus said quietly, as if those 3 words could erase years of deceit, as if love were a justification instead of a weapon. "I know you do," I replied, my voice calm but cold. "But love doesn't excuse cruelty, Marcus. What you and Christian did wasn't a mistake. It was calculated. You both made deliberate choices, and those choices were meant to destroy me for your own convenience." He was silent for a long time before speaking again. "For what it's worth, I think Christian misjudged you from the start. He saw what he wanted to see, a woman he could shape and control. He never realized how strong you actually are." "No," I agreed softly. "He didn't. And that was his greatest mistake." 2 years after the divorce, Meridian Capital Partners wasn't just standing, it was soaring. Our client base had tripled, profits were higher than ever, and new offices in Chicago and Los Angeles had turned us into a national presence. Rebecca appeared on the cover of Financial Weekly, celebrated as one of the most influential women in finance. But my personal victory came one ordinary Tuesday morning when my assistant buzzed through, her voice tinged with excitement. "Ms. Morrison, there's a Mr. David Chen here to see you. He says it's about a business opportunity you'll find very interesting." David Chen, as it turned out, was the brother of Sarah Chen, the private investigator who'd helped me dismantle Christian's lies. Unlike his sister, David specialized in corporate acquisitions. His job was to buy broken companies and sell them for profit, like a shark that thrived on weakness. "I think you'll want to take a look at this," he said, sliding a folder across my desk, the faintest hint of satisfaction in his expression. "Morrison Investment Group is officially up for sale." I opened the file, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. There it was. The company Christian and Marcus had sacrificed everything for, now a hollow shell of its former self. The numbers told the story. Hemorrhaging cash, investors gone, reputation in tatters. The asking price? $12 million. Considering their remaining assets and contracts, David explained, it's actually a solid deal for someone who knows how to rebuild a broken brand. $12 million. Barely a blip compared to what I'd earned since the settlement. And yet, it was priceless in what it represented. The final move in a game Christian never realized I was playing. David leaned back, grinning. "Oh, and one more thing. They don't know who the buyer is." I returned his smile, sharp and deliberate. "Perfect," I said. "Let's keep it that way." "I've been representing you through a shell company," David explained. "So, as far as they know, they're selling to an anonymous investment group." The image that instantly came to mind, Christian's expression when he realized who'd actually bought his beloved firm, was almost too delicious to imagine. Almost. The deal closed without a single hitch, faster and cleaner than any of the lies Christian had ever told. Morrison Investment Group officially became a subsidiary of Meridian Capital Partners, absorbed into the empire I'd built from the rubble he left behind. And when the paperwork was signed, I felt something I hadn't in years. Genuine closure. It was better than therapy. Christian called the day the sale went public. I was standing by my office window, watching the city glitter below, when his name flashed on my phone. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Summer. His voice was hollow, stripped of its practiced charm. I just found out who bought the company. Congratulations on the sale, I said evenly, keeping my tone light, professional. I heard you got a fair price considering, well, everything. Why? The word broke out of him, raw and jagged. You've already taken everything from me. Why this too? I didn't take anything from you, Christian, I said quietly. I just stopped letting you take from me. I leaned back in my chair, calm, centered. You built that company during our marriage, community property. Legally, half of it was always mine. Now I own all of it, fair and square. You don't understand what that company meant to me, he said, the anger draining into something closer to despair. Oh, I understand perfectly, I replied. It was your validation, your proof of success, your legacy. The same way our marriage was supposed to define me, except you tried to destroy mine while building yours on lies. Now I'm rebuilding what's left of yours on truth. The line went silent long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, quietly, he asked, "What are you going to do with it?" "Turn it into something that doesn't need fraud to survive," I said simply. Integrating Morrison Investment Group into Meridian Capital Partners took 6 painstaking months. We retained the best employees, the trustworthy clients, and the solid financial infrastructure that had once made the firm viable. The rest, the arrogance, the toxic culture, the entitled old guard that had thrived under Christian, was dismantled piece by piece. But the real shock came when I dug through the financial records. The once powerful man who'd lorded over millions was now nearly broke, juggling debts and liquidating assets to stay afloat. His reputation was radioactive. No one in the industry would touch him. The same colleagues who'd once fawned over him now crossed the street to avoid being seen in his company. Marcus, ever the survivor, had fared a little better. He'd salvaged a modest consultancy gig after distancing himself from Christian during the scandal. But his days of wealth and influence were long gone, just like the illusion of control that had defined both their lives. Meanwhile, I stood in the office that bore my name, looking out at the skyline that had once seemed impossibly out of reach, and realized something simple but profound. Justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet satisfaction, watching the world set itself right while you finally, peacefully, move forward. Marcus had relocated to California, opened a modest consulting firm, and was slowly piecing together a quieter version of his former life. A wise move, really, even if his judgment in partners had always been his fatal flaw. As for me, I was thriving in every sense that once felt impossible. The penthouse that used to feel like a gilded cage was now my sanctuary. I ran companies that generated more revenue than Christian could have imagined. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for the next betrayal. But as life often does, it decided that my story wasn't finished. It happened at a charity gala, the kind of glittering event where I'd once stood silently at Christian's side, smiling on cue. That night, I was there on my own terms. When I met Dr. James Mitchell, a pediatric surgeon at Mount Sinai, recently divorced, kind eyes that carried the quiet weight of someone who'd seen too much suffering to be impressed by money or titles. "So, you're the woman who brought down Morrison Investment Group," he said with mild curiosity, not accusation. "I'm the woman who survived Morrison Investment Group," I corrected with a small smile. "There's a difference." He studied me for a moment, his gray eyes sharp but compassionate. "I imagine there is. That must have taken extraordinary strength." It was the first time in years someone had acknowledged what I'd endured instead of what I'd won. Most people saw the penthouse, the press, the success, not the wreckage I'd crawled through to get there. But James did. He saw the person, not the performance. We ended up talking for 3 hours after the formal program had ended, long after most guests had slipped away. He told me about his work, the long hours, the pressure of holding children's lives in his hands, and the marriage that had crumbled under its weight. I told him about rebuilding a company born from betrayal, about how it felt to question every instinct until I finally learned to trust them again. When the staff began clearing tables, he asked, "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere quiet, where we can actually talk without an audience pretending not to listen? I almost said no. After Christian, the thought of letting any man close again felt like volunteering for heart surgery without anesthesia. But something about James was different. His sincerity wasn't performed. It was steady, real, earned. I should warn you, I said, half joking, half serious. I come with baggage. Public scandal, trust issues, an ex-husband who treated marriage like a business transaction, and a tendency to run background checks before date number 2. He smiled, not the polished grin of someone who'd practiced charm in a mirror, but something genuine, open, and entirely human. Good, he said lightly. That means you'll see me coming. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not the brittle kind I'd used to mask pain, but something honest, something that felt like the start of a new story, one built not on revenge or survival, but on peace. I come with emergency surgery schedules, James said with a wry smile, a tendency to vanish into work for 12-hour stretches, and an ex-wife who tells anyone who'll listen that I chose my career over her. Want to compare baggage over dinner Friday? I caught myself smiling back, really smiling, for the first time in what felt like forever. That sounds perfect, I said, and for once, it actually did. 6 months later, I was standing in the bathroom of my penthouse, staring at a pregnancy test marked by 2 undeniable pink lines. My mind spun through a storm of emotions I couldn't quite name. After everything, the years of believing I was defective, the humiliation of being labeled barren in open court, the cruel joke of a husband who'd sterilized himself, here I was, pregnant. James and I had been careful, deliberate. Our relationship had grown slowly, grounded in honesty and patience, the polar opposite of what I'd known before. He understood my hesitations, respected my independence, and encouraged my ambition instead of competing with it. When I'd once confessed that I wanted children someday, he'd simply smiled and said, "Someday sounds good to me, when you're ready." Apparently someday had arrived earlier than expected. "Summer?" His voice called from the bedroom, warm and steady. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the bathroom door, still holding the test, still half convinced this was some dream I'd wake from. James's eyes flicked from my face to my trembling hands, and then back again. The concern melted into something softer, awe, maybe even joy. "Are you?" he began, but stopped himself, waiting for me to find my own words first. "I'm pregnant," I said at last, the words feeling fragile and miraculous all at once. After everything, after Christian, after all those lies, I'm actually pregnant. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gathered me into his arms, holding me with a gentleness that almost undid me. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," I admitted, laughing through the tears that had already started, and excited, and vindicated, like the universe just reminded me it has a wicked sense of humor and flawless timing. James smiled against my hair, his voice low and certain. Then I'd say the universe finally got something right. When Emma Rose Mitchell came into the world on a snowy Tuesday morning in February, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, a full head of dark hair, and her father's determined chin, I finally understood what winning really meant. It wasn't in balance sheets or court victories, or watching Christian's empire collapse under its own deceit. Real victory was this tiny, perfect life resting in my arms, proof that I had endured everything meant to destroy me and emerged stronger, wiser, and capable of a love that no betrayal could ever touch. When Emma was 6 months old, James asked me to marry him. There was no glittering diamond, no grand gesture for the cameras, just his grandmother's plain gold band, and a promise to spend his life being worthy of the trust I'd chosen to give him. We were married in the penthouse garden, surrounded by the few people who had stood by me when everything else fell apart. It was simple, beautiful, and exactly what I needed. Christian and Marcus, of course, weren't invited. Word eventually reached me that they'd settled in Portland, Marcus running a small advisory firm while Christian toiled as a mid-level analyst. They were together at last, living openly, but their reputations were long beyond repair. And honestly, I wish them peace, because sometimes the most exquisite revenge isn't destruction, it's living well. and I was living very well indeed. If my story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of people who turned heartbreak into triumph. Remember this: the people who underestimate you are often the ones who hand you your greatest motivation to rise, rebuild, and prove them spectacularly wrong.